Hey guys, I want to talk to you a little bit today about some relationship stuff. This came up a few weeks ago. I was having a deeper conversation with a friend of mine that I hadn't seen for a long time, and we got to talking about our past relationships in our lives and just things that didn't work out. And something that came up was this this topic of violence and women that we'd had in our lives in the past that had exhibited these violent qualities, and it was interesting and sad. I got to talking about his last long term relationship was a woman that I think they were together like 5 or 6 years, and they had like, built businesses together. They had moved abroad. They had all sorts of crazy stuff. And when their relationship dissolved, I remember as an outsider looking in, I mean, never really knew the whole story, and I never got the whole story up until actually, ironically, just a few weeks ago, we were having this sit down talk, and this is like years in the past kind of thing about what all went on. But we got to talking about just the very end of the relationship, and he was describing this story, sadly enough, that their relationship had manifested somewhat in a violent manner, whereby the woman was doing these like violent things to the guy, where she had started to like hit the guy regularly, and she was doing all this like crazy like physical stuff. And of course, like this is the the element that makes it hard to deal with for us as men is because, of course, I mean, this should go without saying. Like, we as men, like, we are not allowed, nor should we at all, of course, respond to violence with violence. Okay, if somebody's hitting you, if a woman's hitting you, like, you can't hit her back. You can't do these things. That's not right. There's no, I mean, if you have to defend yourself and you're in like a life-threatening situation, like, yes, but striking back and like adding to the violence and contributing to the violence, and odds are you're probably, for most men on this earth, are going to overpower like most of the women that you're dealing with. I mean, it's not an option. It's not a thing, guys. So I mean, that said, that sort of thing that I'm describing there is kind of the point of the talk, and like what I'll circle back to at the end of this whole thing. But it's like you can't exist, you can't be with somebody that has violent tendencies, okay? And getting back to my buddy's story here, I mean, we were talking and comparing and contrasting the various relationships that both of us had been in, and I'll tell you the story from mine when it started to rear its head. But my buddy was like, I was always disappointed in myself because I saw those tendencies like ramping up early on, and I let it go. I let it slide. I let it get so bad to the point where, like I said, I mean, she was like striking the guy regularly. She was like, actually, like scarily enough, like basically using weapons around the house, like sharp objects and firearms, in one instance where she was kind of like brandishing them around and just doing like crazy, insane things that he was like, I don't know how I allowed it to get to that point. I don't know how I stayed with her that long, like seeing those things, but just that was like one of his biggest regrets in life, one of his biggest learning lessons about relationships and this sort of stuff is that yes, like there should be like a zero tolerance policy for that sort of stuff, of course. And in hindsight, it's easy to see that, and it's sad that he had to like walk through that whole path and go through this whole crazy ordeal of unplugging himself from that relationship by the time it was all finally said and done. But contrast to that was like a story that I had, and this is going back for me a good 3, 4, maybe 5 years now. There was a girl that I was dating for about 3 years at the time, and I remember like over the course of our relationship, like it started to kind of present itself. A little bits and pieces of these elements started to present themselves. Like what happened, with this situation is like towards the end, as things were just getting haywire for whatever reason, and they certainly weren't good reasons. We didn't have a bad relationship. It was just she was just an angry person. She dealt with a lot, but like basically it started with her being like very very verbal and very loud, and she would actually like get up like close to my face and like just be yelling like at a close proximity to me, like almost like just a twitch or a hair or a split second away from pouncing and like striking and doing something physical. But it didn't quite come to that point, thankfully, in any situations I've been to. But I remember getting to a point at the very end where she would get mad and she would get upset, and it literally got to the point where she was like punching walls and like just hitting things and throwing things around the house and doing this sort of stuff, this physical show of anger and being upset, and honestly as a precursor to violence. And I remember like one of the very last things that happened at the very tail end of that relationship was like I remember sitting on the couch, and I was having like a very like I was I stand by this. I was maintaining my cool. I was like talking in the same volume and the same cadence. And I'm actually talking to you guys right now and recording this, but I remember it got to the point in this conversation where she had her laptop in her lap. She was doing some work, and she hit the laptop with her fists, like both fists, like slammed it down on the keyboard of the laptop. She threw the laptop on the ground. And I remember just thinking to myself, like at that moment, like things were just completely broke, and I just knew like that was it. Like that was the last straw. And I ended that relationship very shortly thereafter. I think we only dated like maybe a week or two after that, and then I was out. But the important part here, this is the whole message between telling you the story about my buddy, between telling you my little story, is that when you start to detect and start to see this sort of behavior that's a precursor to physical violence, i.e., in my case, I was seeing the things ramp up, evolving from like those episodes of yelling in close proximity to like hitting other things to like I knew in my mind, I believed that it was not that far off that this woman would be striking me potentially at some point. And not like I thought she was going to be able to hurt me or break my bones or do anything like that, but it's just like you cannot function romantically in a partnership with another person that's violent to you as guys. And like I said, this is the fucked up part, guys. We almost can't defend ourselves. You can't strike back, even using a fair deal of force, okay, to restrain her can be construed in a crazy, fucked up, funky light, right? If anybody sees that there's bruises on a person's arm or like anything like that, so it could have been, like I said, an innocent case of like you were just defending yourself, but you can't prove those things a lot of times. A lot of times it's your word against theirs, and we live in a crazy, shitty, fucked up world where like all sorts of bad things happen to good guys. Okay, unfortunately, but like I said, the message of the talk, guys, is it if you start to see those sorts of characteristics presenting themselves, if you start to see that sort of behavior, just know that is a precursor for violence, and that's something that you really need to get out of. Like you can't be with a person like that. I think I've said this like 3 or 4 times now, but it's not going to be a sustainable situation for you, most likely, if this is a woman that has this sort of energy inside of her, and this is just what she does, and this is what she thinks is okay, and this is just how she operates, okay? Like I said, don't have the regrets that my buddy did, like getting to that point with this violent woman that was doing all these crazy, insane things. I hope you can take a little bit of the tact that I took and just like, if you start to see these things adding up and you start to see that inside of a person, just get out of that situation. You have to. Like it's either going to end early on when you detect these things early and you exit at a more peaceful time, or it's going to end really badly, most likely in my buddy's case, where it just turned into this whole fireball. Get out of that one. And I don't want you guys to have to go through that. So I just want you to think about your situations today. I want you to think about women you've been involved with. Do any of these characteristics present themselves? Okay, have you been around people like this? And like I said, the whole point of the talk today, guys, is like, first of all, that like no man should tolerate any sort of violence from any woman. But second of all, the important part is learning to detect it, and then lastly, learning to get out of that situation before it turns into anything bad in your life. Okay. It sucks to have these kinds of talks. It sucks that a lot of us guys go through these sorts of things. I think this is something that is not probably talked about nearly enough, but I really believe that there is more men in this world, more good men that innocently restrain themselves, that don't strike back, they just take and accept a lot of violence from women, and we just deal with it. And that's just how society is. I truly believe there is more men out there like that than there are these men that are like the Chris Brown Rihanna cases, where the guy is actually truly like beaten up on the woman for whatever reasons, like whatever the case is. Like there's more of us out there, I think, that are like me, that are like most likely you guys out there that are never going to strike a woman. You're not a violent person. Like you don't have this inside of you, and you know right from wrong. You know that's not something to do, but that doesn't get talked about. That's not what's seen. It is what it is. That's just the world we live in. But like I said, guys, like just make the choice. Do not involve yourself with women that act this way. Okay, plain and simple. That's it. That's the end of the message. Okay. All right, guys. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Talk to you all soon.